Hello, this is Dr. Jacqueline with DTP-Leadership Group. You've tuned in to Hot Topic Bold Talk, the podcast where we dive into everything that matters today. Join me as we explore the hottest trends and pressing issues with conversations that sizzle and perspectives that heat up. This is Hot Topic Bold Talk, since every chat has something cooking. Let's dive in to today's discussion. Hello, this is Dr. Jacqueline with DTP Leadership Group. This is Hot Topic Bold Talk. This is podcast 80. Can a past president be given immunity from prosecution when he tried to overturn the last presidential election? That's the question I have for the beginning of this podcast. What I want you to do is listen to the actions that have been taken by retired military leaders, other authorities, and the media to address all of their concerns about him ever getting immunity. So I want to introduce this podcast in the following way. In the Week magazine for the week of December 29th through 2023 to January 4th, 2024, in the article Trump should he be immune to prosecution, was one of the beginning statements about this subject. Here's what the article comments were. Special counsel Jack Smith just pulled a serious poker move, said the Nation. Smith asked last week for an expedient Supreme Court review of Donald Trump's principal defense that he's immune from criminal prosecution for anything he did while president, including allegedly conspiring to subvert 2020 election. The outrageous argument runs counter to the very idea of the rule of law, which the writer says in the Nation. The U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkin rejected Trump's motion, and Smith wants the Supreme Court to leapfrog lower courts and deny Trump's appeal so that the trial, now scheduled to begin March 4th, is not delayed beyond the 2024 election. The Supreme Court agreed to quickly review Smith's request, but the special counsel's gamble could backfire if 5 judges side with Trump. The court has 3 Trump appointees in addition to Fox News uncle Samuel Alito and the equally partisan Clarence Thomas, his activist wife, Jenna, frantically urged Republicans to keep Trump in power, calling Joe Biden's victory the greatest heist in American history. Now, it's not clear the reason that Smith wanted to delay Trump's trial. Really kind of fascinating what he did. Jason Willick in the Washington Post said the obvious subtitle is if Trump is not tried and convicted by the election, the chances of a Biden victory will take a hit. Trump wants the trial delayed so that he can spend the campaign attacking Biden for weaponizing the Justice Department without being stained by a potential guilty verdict. If he's elected before the trial takes place, he will direct the DOJ to drop all charges. That should worry Democrats and any of us in America, but not supposedly impartial Smith, who has made it clear he's an aggressive political actor. Here is the ending of this article. Smith is absolutely right, said Jesse Wigman in the New York Times, which is why the Supreme Court is hearing the case. The American people deserve to know well before they head to the polls whether one candidate criminally conspired to overturn the last presidential election. Trump, however, hopes to exploit the Achilles heel of democracy, said Paul Rosenweg in the Atlantic. Due process is easily manipulated by the maliciously inclined. Trump is notorious for filing a blizzard of nonsensical motions and appeals to gum up the courts. And he is doing exactly that in all four of his criminal cases. Let's hope the Supreme Court recognizes what a dangerous moment this is for the rule of law. Now we go on to April 13th in 2024 at 3:09 p.m. We have the Action Fund organization providing a Supreme Court alert and a statement. They say retired military leaders warn Supreme Court of the threat to democracy if Trump is found to be immune ahead of next week's oral arguments. The MSNBC says former military leaders are sounding the alarm ahead of Donald Trump's Supreme Court immunity hearing later this month. Retired four-star admirals and generals, along with the former secretaries of the U.S. Navy, Army, and Air Force, want to warn the justices about the dangers of his presidential immunity claim. We risk jeopardizing America's standing as a guardian of democracy in the world, and further feeding the spread of authoritarianism, thereby threatening the national security of the United States and democracies around the world. They have submitted an amicus brief, the court sounding their alarm on Trump's immunity argument. Action Fund goes on to say, why, you ask? Because a recent poll confirmed that millions of Americans who would otherwise vote for Trump wouldn't if he was convicted before the election. Now, there is a group that I have a great deal of respect for. It's the American Constitutional Law Society, and it's made up of brilliant lawyers. And in their newsletter on April 25th, 2024 at 5:33 p.m., SCOTUS weighs presidential immunity claims in the case Trump versus United States. And here are the statements. Today, the Supreme Court heard the final oral argument scheduled for this term in the presidential immunity case. The events of January 6, 2021, and the resulting litigation have been thoroughly reported on. These oral arguments were extraordinary and required special attention be paid, not only because they involve a historical first, the criminal prosecution of a former U.S. president, but because of how the hearings proceeded. In this section, what you need to know, they present the following. The question presented, whether and if so, to what extent does a former president enjoy presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve official acts during his term in office? What happened at the oral arguments? There were a few unusual moments, including two of the judges engaging with and questioning each other directly, and former President Donald Trump's legal team foregoing a rebuttal altogether. Not to mention that Justice Thomas, whose wife has been accused of participating in the same events that Trump is accused of in the underlying case here, not only did not recuse himself, but asked the first question to each side's advocates. But what made the 2.5-hour hearing most worthy of note were the dangerous arguments between being advanced by a former president's legal team, which seemed to find a warm reception by several members of the court. The court spent precious little time on the actual conduct of the former president central to this case, with Justice Kavanaugh noting to the government's lawyers I'm not focused on the here and now of this case. I'm very concerned about the future. This position led to a series of hypotheticals as several of the justices attempt to find the boundaries of what might constitute an official act. In response to one such hypothetical, Trump's advocates made the assertion that an order assassination of a political rival might be considered as an official act depending on the circumstances involved. Now, we know that he's threatened Biden several times if he gets to be president. At another point, he asserted that the president's calling for a coup to remain in power may well be an official act. A professor, Ruth Benskitz, a noted historian and expert on authoritarianism, commented, "Whatever the court does, having this case heard and the idea of having immunity for a military coup taken seriously by being debated is a big victory in the information war. Authoritarians specialize in normalizing extreme ideas and involves giving them a respected platform." What happens next? Several justices indicated a desire to send this case back to the lower court to suss out what exactly constitutes an official act in the underlying charges against Trump. After arguably unnecessary delaying consideration of this case in the first place, to return it to the lower courts without resolving the central issue would be to further delay the trial until after the election this November, potentially putting accountability for Trump's alleged crimes out of reach entirely. So you need to understand this case. We cannot allow what happened, said the American Constitutional Society at the court today, to be normalized. In moments when our country appears to lurch toward authoritarianism, we will call it out. It will take all of us to defeat authoritarianism. And there's an excellent article by Vox that you need to hear because it is really something about what happened at the Supreme Court. It will be in the list of references that I have at the end of this podcast. For more information about the case on the court's docket this term, make sure to listen to their Broken Law podcast, episode 124, and catch the video SCOTUS preview programs. So, and what I'm saying is SCOTUS. Now, in conclusion, here's what I would say to you. The conversations in their Friday, April 26, 2024 at 8:15 a.m. newsletter quoted constitutional law scholar Claire Warford, and she argued, the immunity case is about far more than Trump. That's what led Justice Neil Gorsuch to say, we're writing a law for the ages. That's true, according to Woolfolk, a political scientist at the College of Charleston. We are at a crux in a history where the intersection between the executive and the judicial branches is being stress tested like it never has before. And my hope is that the judicial system will perform its job and the system remain intact. In the week on March 15, 2024, Ian Millhiser in Vox says, no one is coming to save us from Trump. Trump will be defeated, if at all, in November at the ballot box. So, listeners, you need to take the time to read Donald Trump on what his second term would look like in the Time magazine, and I've given you that connection. The title is How Far Trump Would Go, and it's an amazing interview by Eric Lessa, who's from Palm Beach, Florida. It is time, I think we all face, that fighting the reality of what Trump's plans are going to do to all of us. And we need to be frightened about it and fight it. We need to save ourselves and get every person possible out to support President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris in November. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please take it seriously and read the articles I've given you. Thank you. There you have it. Another episode of Hot Topic Bold Talk is in the books. We journeyed through today's discussion, uncovering diverse perspectives and shedding light on a very critical matter. A massive thanks to all of you that are my listeners. I really appreciate you, and I'm so glad you're a part of this adventure. Feel free to drop your views in the polls and the Q&A section. It's really important for me to hear from you and know how you feel or what you think about my podcast. Gear up for more intriguing discussions in our next episode. Until then, stay connected, stay engaged, and let's keep those conversations buzzing. Thank you.